We've made it to the end of 2024. This year I saw over 140 new movie releases. Some of them were great, some of them were very surprising. We had a lot of stuff that was very mediocre, and then there's the movies that were just plain bad. The stuff that makes you wonder, what movie did you think you were making? The movies that are just such obvious cash grabs, where executives are clearly just trying to exploit audiences. Here are my picks for the 10 worst movies of 2024. While I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your picks for the worst movies of 2024. Now, I didn't see every single movie that came out this year, and some movies that are on other people's worst of the year list won't be on my list because I never saw them. Everyone said they were terrible, so I didn't waste my time watching them. One more thing before we get started, there is a companion video to this over on Patreon with 6 more of my picks of the worst movies of 2024. If you sign up for a new annual membership, you can get 25% off your membership. That would be all of the exclusive live streams and videos in 2025 for under $20 if you sign up at that lowest tier. If you like the channel, want more content, want to support the channel, consider joining over on Patreon. This is the best time to do it because you can get 25% off if you sign up for that annual membership. The details are down below in the description, and let's get started roasting movies. Coming in at number 10, Imaginary. For each of these movies, I'm going to give them an award. This movie wins the Blumhouse Award. Now, almost every single year, Blumhouse will put out a couple of great films, maybe some of the best films of that year. But they will also always put out some of the worst movies of the year, usually horror films, and that is the case with Imaginary. I didn't see some of their other films, so the Blumhouse Award goes to Imaginary. This should be a pretty easy win because you just do Child's Play. You do Chucky with an imaginary friend. There's a kid with an imaginary friend, and it turns out their imaginary friend is actually a killer, and they're making it look like the kid is the one that's causing all of these accidents. It's just Child's Play with an imaginary friend. It's familiar, but it's fresh and new enough to be something interesting. But that's not what this movie is.
And you blew it! You blew it.
It's a movie called Imaginary with no imagination. It uses the exact same generic jump scare bag of tricks where as you're watching the tense sequences, you know exactly when the jump scare will happen. Where there's tense music, someone looks one way, the tense music stops and then they turn around and then there's a loud noise and something hops at your face. It's the same exact bag of tricks every single one of these movies use. And it's a film that the first 2/3 of it is just boring and nothing happens. And then the third act, it does something kind of interesting where they go into imagination world, but they didn't have the budget to pull it off. And it's not really what you wanted out of this film. So a movie that just has nothing interesting to offer. It's just a bad, cheap horror film. And the part that was so disappointing to me, the lead actress in it was in Jurassic World Dominion, and I thought she was one of the standout parts of Jurassic World Dominion. I wanted to see her in more things and better things, and they gave her Imaginary. That is so disappointing. Number 9, The Crow. This wins the award for the most ill-conceived remake of the year. Now, the Crow lore has plenty of room to tell more stories because it's not tied to a specific character. But with this film, they decided to tell the Eric Draven story again, and there's a big, gigantic problem with this. Eric Draven is the Crow from the original 1994 film, which he was portrayed by Brandon Lee, who died while making that film. And anytime something like that happens, it kind of puts that film up on a pedestal. It puts it in sort of this sacred category because the film itself is so tied to an actual person's legacy, their life, and their death. And with this movie, they decided to go into that same ground that many consider sacred, which right off the bat is not a great idea when it did not need to be about Eric Draven. And because the original is so beloved, they took it in this whole other direction, which is one more reason why it did not need to be Eric Draven's story. And to differentiate itself, they decided to really focus in on the love story between the two lead characters. The problem here is that means the crow doesn't show up until well into the back half of the film. You showed up for the crow, and instead you got two people in rehab doing a Bonnie and Clyde romance. That's not what we signed up for. The other big gigantic problem here is that these two characters are just so broken and dysfunctional that you're not really rooting for their relationship. You're not rooting for their love story. It plays so much like a weekend infatuation rather than a timeless love story that when the movie itself is built around the fact that he would give up eternity for her, you don't buy into it.
You've made a huge mistake.
Thus, you get a film that's just built on a faulty premise that doesn't deliver what you want out of the film, enough crow action. And when it does this one cool sequence, you go, why wasn't that the whole movie? The whole movie should have been that, not this broken love story that no one cares about. Next up, Atlas. This is a Netflix original where Jennifer Lopez wears a mech suit and battles robots. That should be awesome. It is definitely not, and it wins the Tone Deaf Award for 2024. It's pretty easy to put out a movie where a movie star runs around in a mech suit, battling other mech suits, robots, things like that, and make me enjoy the film. And somehow, this film took that pretty basic schlocky premise and dropped the ball entirely. Now, at just face value, the problem here is the entire middle section of this film is Jennifer Lopez walking around in a forest in her mech suit, making friends with her mech suit.
Are you kidding me?
That's the most of the runtime of the film is just like her learning that she's misunderstood her mech suit all along, and her mech suit isn't so bad after all. Which you're like, what? I want to see her murdering robots with the mech suit, not becoming BFFs with her mech suit. But this leads into the tone deaf part of this movie. Last year, there was a gigantic writers and actors strike where a huge portion of it was about the very serious concerns of creatives that AI will be replacing human talent. Netflix was one of the prime films in the middle of this who are using AI way too much, and they put out a movie right after all of that where the central premise is, look, AI isn't so bad after all. All those movies where AI are the enemies that tries to take over the planet, like those mean Terminator movies, AIs are just misunderstood, and we should be friends with them after all. What on earth are you doing? What is this movie? Why is this movie? How did this get greenlit? And why would you make a mech suit movie about becoming friends with your robot suit? Number 7, Unfrosted. This wins the Bad Joke Award. Now, I was a massive fan of Seinfeld back in the 90s. Now, back over 10 years ago, I saw an interview with him where he described how he was spending multiple years writing a joke about the creation of the Pop-Tart.
I've probably been working on this for 2 years. In comedy, what you do is you think of something that you think is funny, and then you go from there. I like the first line to be funny right away. When I was a kid and they invented the Pop-Tart, the back of my head blew right off. And that got the whole thing started, that a specific part of my head blew off. Not just my head, but just the back.
And that joke became the foundation for this movie. In fact, the punchline that he said in that interview 12 years ago is in this movie.
I took one bite, and that blew the back of my head right off.
It was a bad joke.
So, when it comes to this film, clearly he's been thinking about it for a very long time, and for whatever reason, it absolutely does not work for me at all. It feels like an in-joke for people born in the 1950s. It's like it's doing juvenile humor for current children, but about observations for people that were children in the 1960s. So I don't know who this movie was for. So many of the jokes are things like, hey, look, it's Hugh Grant as Tony the Tiger. Get the joke? That's it. Another one, they're testing the Pop-Tart and it works, but someone blows up while they're making it. Get the joke?
And I thought my jokes were bad.
That's the level of sophistication in this film. It's so base level, so I just don't understand what Seinfeld was going for, why he was drawn towards this, why this is the movie that he chose to write, direct, and star in. It was a miscalculation and misfire from beginning to end for me. Number 6, The Killer. This one wins the Heartbreak Award because this is the movie which broke my heart the most. Back in the 80s and 90s, John Woo is an absolute action legend. And he delivered the most dynamic shootouts that had ever been seen through the choreography, just how visceral and tactile everything was in them with the camera movements. Everything was fantastic. And he also put out movies that had so much emotion to them with great character dynamics and relationships. And one of those movies that was so excellent and groundbreaking was 1989's The Killer, starring Chow Yun-fat.
That was awesome.
They've been trying to remake this movie since the early 90s. And then 9 years ago, John Woo signed on to remake his own classic. And John Woo took his absolute action classic and converted it into a totally generic, by the numbers, checking all the boxes, generic streaming movie. That to me is heartbreaking.
You're breaking my heart.
Beyond that, it's kind of a classic Hollywood remake in that it checks all the right boxes for the plot beats, but it doesn't understand why any of these things matter. And it feels like we have to put our own spin on them. And everything that was so perfectly crafted in the original is just a series of beats that you need to hit. They have no meaning. They have no significance. It just stops along the way until the credits roll. And that is so disheartening that he would do this to his own movie and make something so bland. Then we have A Family Affair, and this one wins the What on Earth Are You Doing in This Movie award for both Nicole Kidman and Zac Efron being in this film.
This is so painful to watch.
I debated giving this one the Written by AI award because it is another one of these just totally generic streaming movies where it feels like someone typed in some prompts into ChatGPT and this movie was cranked out, that it's a very familiar formula, very familiar premise where a misunderstanding between family members, two people start dating that they shouldn't be dating, and all of the obvious hijinks that would come with that, but with absolutely no humanity to any of it. It's just completely soulless. No character is likable. No character is relatable. None of them feel like they were written by a human that has spoken to other humans. It's just things happening that hit all the proper beats for the genre. It feels detached from humanity, where like it's so LA-centric about a bunch of people that work in the entertainment industry and the dynamics of people in the entertainment industry. So it's not relatable to normal people at all. It's just one of these movies where like, really, Zach? Really, Nicole? You're in this movie? Zac Efron, you were in The Iron Claw like 3 months before this garbage came out. That movie's fantastic. Why did you do this? Why would you do a movie like this?
This can't be real.
In fourth, Rebel Moon, whichever Rebel Moon stuff came out this year. The director's cuts were better than the theatrical versions, and had they only released the director's cuts, then we wouldn't have included this in the worst of the year list. I don't think it's particularly good, but it's not worst of the year quality. But the cynical move to have the two cuts and to do it the way they did it is so off-putting to me. That, to me, is some of the worst stuff done with movies this year. I'm a Zack Snyder fan. When I heard that they were going to do his version of Star Wars, and he kind of had a lot of creative control, I was all on board with all of that.
I kept coming back to it because I really had something to say about the sort of tropes of sci-fi. There's got to be a why of it, and how do we break it?
And then we actually got the results. And unfortunately, I just found it to be so incredibly generic. It's so derivative of Star Wars, Battle Beyond the Stars, Magnificent Seven, Seven Samurai, without having anything meaningful added to it. And the characters themselves are just so forgettable and bland. And then we got the director's cuts, which Zack Snyder had extensively defended the fact that there were two versions and said he stands by both of them, and they weren't that much better. Sure, there's a little bit more depth to it. It's more fun when there's blood, but it wasn't actually good. All of the plot issues, all of the lack of depth of the characters, all of the cliches, it was all still there. The director's cuts didn't solve any of that. Zack Snyder, for some reason, agreed to do this and defended it and became the face of all of this.
In the R-rated versions of the movie, everything is amplified. The R-rated versions of the movie have a slightly more satirical, the PG-13 movies end up being pretty earnest. They don't have sort of sex and violence to over the top them. That in the R-rated versions, because the violence is so over the top and the sex is so over the top, that you sort of, the tone changes.
Why would they do this?
All of the actual Zack Snyder audience wants the pure, real version. So it's just so ill-conceived from the get-go, and Zack Snyder defended all of it. So this one wins the "What on Earth Are You Doing?" award. Who thought this was a good idea, and why are you defending it in so many interviews? Real quick, before I give you my top three, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what are your picks for the worst movies of 2024? Also, I've done a bunch of other end of the year lists. I did the comic book movies ranked, biggest disappointments, biggest surprises. I did one where I kind of talked about some of my favorite TV shows of the year, and we got best of the year coming out tomorrow, and I will be doing a ranking of all 140 plus new releases from 2024 that I saw. I've got a playlist somewhere around here. I'll have a pinned comment. Check out all those videos to find out what I thought about this year in movies. In third place, Snow White and the Seven Samurai. This wins the Absolutely No One Cared award. From a purely objective standpoint, this was the worst made movie that I saw in 2024.
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
Utter incompetence from top to bottom in the scripting, the dialogue, performances, set design, everything like that. And there's a simple reason for that. This is an asylum film.
No! God, please, no! No!
No, don't like that.
If you don't know what Asylum is, they are infamous for putting out mockbusters. So if Transformers comes out, they put out a cheapy movie called Transmorphers. And they just try and exploit whatever thing comes out, they're going to do the cheapy knockoff version of it. That's their whole brand. That has been their brand for 20 years. So normally, I would never watch an Asylum film, but this one was called Snow White and the Seven Samurai. That's a good title right there. And so I didn't think it would be good, but I thought maybe Asylum has something. Maybe at least there's some sparkle of creativity. Nope, every single bit of the creative dust sprinkled on this project went into just writing the title, Snow White and the Seven Samurai. It does not in any way deliver on any of it. Like, there was no concern from anyone. It was just, there's a title, people like me will be stupid and click on it, hoping that maybe there's something there, and there's nothing whatsoever in here. There's nothing of value.
You suck! You suck! Thanks, sweetie. You suck!
I don't understand how the studio still exists and why they still exist and why anyone that likes movies, anyone that loves movies, anyone that would want to get in filmmaking, why would you ever have anything to do with the studio that has never at any point in time even cared about trying to make something even kind of good? All they do is try and trick people into watching their knockoff movies.
How dare you!
Our dishonorable runner-up, Borderlands. This one wins the Too Many Cooks Award, where this is a film that was absolutely butchered by having too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many cooks that wouldn't stop tinkering with this movie. And somehow they got everything absolutely wrong with the movie that they released. So apparently, back in 2020, they had a script that had fantastic buzz surrounding it that was written by Craig Mazin, who did Chernobyl as well as The Last of Us. Shortly afterwards, Eli Roth signed on and started doing some rewrites on it, and they shot the movie principally 3 years ago. That's when they shot this movie. And then 2 years after principal photography, Craig Mazin, the guy that wrote the script, petitioned to have his name removed from the film because it had changed so much since he wrote the script 3 years earlier. His name was pulled off, and somebody named Joe Crombie was added as the official screenwriter for the movie, which is a very obvious pseudonym. Craig Mazin swears that he is not Joe Crombie and he is not the credited screenwriter on this film. Whatever happened, though, the thing that he wrote in 2020 dramatically changed over the course of filming it and in post-production. Then they did even more reshoots on the movie. After it came out, the VFX guys and the stunt guys were talking about making the movie, and they said that they shot a very R-rated movie with severed limbs, blood everywhere, and then the movie they released was PG-13, where once again, they kept tinkering with it and changing it and reworking it. And that's exactly what this movie feels like.
Oh, this is bad. This is really, really bad.
As you're watching it, it is so painfully obvious that every single thing about this movie was changed and everyone had a say and it was fiddled with. And you get just a plain bad film. There's portions where they show up at a planet and then it montages through something where clearly they took a 10-15 minute sequence and turned it into a 30-second montage with voiceover. There's all this stuff that happens that's supposed to be big payoff in the third act that's not set up. And then there's all this stuff they set up with the characters in the first half of the movie that goes absolutely nowhere. It is a movie that does not work on any level entirely because there's no unified vision. There's no cohesive storytelling. It's so obvious that there were all of these different producers, writers, directors, everyone pulling in a different direction with a different say, and you just get this horrible mess out of such of a disjointed collaboration. But the worst of the year, the trinity of garbage, Madam Web, Kraven the Hunter, and Venom: The Last Dance, winning the award for the dumbest movie franchise for the Sony Spider-Man-less Spider-Man universe. This insanely stupid and cynical universe easily was my least favorite thing about movies in the year 2024, where Sony thinks that you are stupid and that you will buy a ticket for anything. So they spent years lying to us, telling us that they were making a Spider-Man universe. They even called it a Spider-Man universe. They put Spider-Man on as graffiti on the wall in the trailer for Morbius. They lied to us for years, and they thought we would keep showing up no matter how bad the movies were that they were putting out. And finally, you get to 2024 and people went, no, Sony, we're not stupid. You're stupid for making such awful films. and the floor finally fell out of the entire thing. An interview was put out with the former CEO of Sony, and he said that Kraven the Hunter is probably the worst launch we had or have had. And you can just even see the problem with this franchise from the next quote that he gave. I still don't understand, because the film is not a bad film.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
Yes, it is. So is Madam Web. These are not good movies. There's no demand for doing a prequel to the origin story for 5 D-grade Spider-Man side characters.
Weird.
Nobody wants that, and you did it anyway, and then you had the one interesting idea that was going to be kind of like the Terminator, except in the world of Spider-Man. That one interesting idea, you got rid of it.
From what you read and you signed on for Madam Web to what we see on screen, was there a lot of changes or not so much?
There were drastic changes. And I can't even tell you what they were.
And that you clearly reworked it in the editing room, used ADR to tape it together. It was bad. That's bad filmmaking. And then you did Kraven the Hunter, where you took a villain and you took him, turned him into this anti-hero, and the plot is just hopping all over the place. You're doing flashbacks like we're in 2004.
This is a mess. None of these storylines make any sense.
The dialogue is abysmal. At my theater, the audience was laughing out loud at the screen because the dialogue was so insanely stupid. A character literally says, "Shortly afterwards, my grandmother died. I haven't seen her since." Right! That's what happens when people die. You don't see them anymore, and that's the line that was in a movie that was reshot and reworked over a year, where ADR is all over this thing. So that's a line that was good enough to not be fixed. What were the lines that they fixed? These are bad movies, based on bad ideas, based on a cynical setup for the whole thing. They launched this thing because they think we're stupid.
And the idiots who made this film are taking 2 hours of my life and robbing it from me in order to give me less than nothing. Yeah. I mean, a movie like this is a crime.
So the worst of the year, the thing that made me angriest about films this year, was this deeply cynical, Spider-Man-less Spider-Man universe. So without question, the trinity of garbage comes in at the dishonorable number 1, the worst of the year. Remember, I got more end of the year lists. You can check them out right over there in that playlist. The comic book movies, disappointments, surprises, best, ranking all the movies, all that fun stuff right over there. If you want to support the channel, consider joining over on Patreon. Use code Sean25 for 25% off a new annual membership. Thank you so much for watching in 2024, and keep talking movies and TV too much in 2025.